A battle of wills. The winds of Arcanos 5 whispered through the ruins of a shattered world. Once a thriving colony, now it was nothing but ash and wreckage, a testament to the cruelty of war. Alex Nerone, a salvager by trade, squinted through the hazy sky, the glowing twin suns beating down on the desolate landscape. His booted feet crunched against the blackened ground, each step a reminder that there was no easy path in this forsaken place. Alex adjusted the breath mask on his face, muttering curses under his breath. The wind carried faint traces of radiation and the smell of burnt metal. He was here for one reason only, to find something worth salvaging. His scanner, nestled in his hand, beeped intermittently as it sifted through the debris of wrecked starships and half-collapsed buildings. The air was thick with silence, unnervingly so. It felt as though the planet itself was mourning the lives lost here, the people who had once called this world home. "Come on, give me something," Alex grumbled, kicking a piece of scorched alien alloy aside. He needed a break. Something good. Anything. Then, a sharp ping cut through the quiet. His eyes shot to the wrist display. A high-energy reading. And it was close, less than 50 meters away. Well. Looks like I've hit the jackpot. Alex's lips curved into a grin, though he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that crept up his spine. A strong energy signature in this wasteland could mean one of two things: a dangerous weapon or a rare artifact worth a fortune. Either way, Alex wasn't about to leave without it. He moved quickly, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust and debris as he made his way toward the source. The ruins were like a graveyard, the skeletal remains of ships and buildings stark against the cracked earth. The ground was littered with fragments of battles long past, and craters still glowed faintly, remnants of the violent confrontations that had once raged here. The closer he got to the source, the more the silence seemed to press against him. Alex wasn't a rookie, he'd been to enough post-apocalyptic worlds to know that something was off about this place. It felt wrong. He rounded the corner of a collapsed tower and froze. There, slumped against a pile of rubble, was a figure. Not just any figure, but an alien. She was tall, with smooth, blue skin that shimmered faintly under the light of the two suns. Her long, dark hair was tangled, streaked with dirt. Her clothing was a patchwork of battle-worn leather armor, torn and scorched by fire. And in her hands, gripped tightly despite her obvious exhaustion, was a massive weapon. A hammer that pulsed with an eerie energy, one that Alex's scanner had already identified. "Well, this is new," Alex muttered under his breath. Finding an alien alive and armed wasn't exactly common, especially in a place like this. He hesitated for a moment, taking in the sight of her. Her powerful build, the sharp features of her face, the tattoos curling along her neck and arms. This wasn't some helpless survivor, this was a warrior. Slowly, Alex moved closer, each step careful, though curiosity pushed him forward. The woman didn't stir, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths, but her intense presence filled the space between them. "What do we have here?" Alex mused, more to himself than to her. His hand hovered over the scanner as he zoomed in on the hammer. It was powerful, far more than just an ordinary weapon. But then again, nothing on Arcanos 5 was ordinary. "Touch it, human," the woman's voice suddenly broke the silence, low and menacing, "and I will crush your skull." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Her voice was raw, filled with the promise of death. But Alex wasn't about to back down. Not now. He raised both hands in a slow, deliberate gesture of peace. "Easy there," he said with a smile that was equal parts cocky and cautious. "I wasn't going to steal it. Just admiring it, that's all." The woman's black eyes narrowed, cold and calculating. She pushed herself upright with a grimace of pain, using the hammer as a crutch. Every movement was slow and deliberate, as though she was conserving every ounce of strength. "I'm Alex," he said, his grin faltering only slightly as he assessed the gash on her thigh, the blood soaking her armor. "Alex Nerone, salvager extraordinaire. And you are?" Her gaze didn't waver. "Vanya," she said curtly, her voice still laced with suspicion, "warrior of the Tovian Protectorate." Vanya. Alex rolled the name around in his mind, wondering how someone like her ended up in a hellhole like this. "Nice to meet you, Vanya," he said with a raised eyebrow. "Now, why don't you put down that hammer, and we can talk like civilized beings?" Her grip tightened, and Alex had the distinct feeling she wasn't buying any of his charm. "You think I'm a fool, human?" she spat. "Humans are liars. Thieves." "Whoa, that's a little harsh, don't you think?" Alex replied, raising an eyebrow. "I'm not like most humans, and besides," he gestured toward her injury. "You're the one bleeding all over the place. If I wanted to hurt you, I would have done it already." Vanya hesitated. Her gaze flickered to her wound, and for a brief moment, Alex saw something flicker in her expression. It wasn't weakness, no, it was something more human. Something that made him take a step forward, reaching for his pack. "I've got a med kit," he said, his tone softer now. "I can patch you up, or you can sit there and bleed out. Your call." For a long moment, Vanya studied him. Her eyes, fierce and unyielding, softened just enough for Alex to see a flicker of something beneath the surface, a woman who, despite everything, had the faintest trace of hope left. Finally, she spoke. "You will help me," she ordered, her voice thick with authority, "or you will die with me." Alex didn't even flinch. "Gladly," he said, trying not to let the smugness creep into his voice. "Let's get you patched up." As he worked, Vanya stood tall and silent, her cold gaze never leaving him. He wasn't sure if she trusted him or if she just considered him useful. But he wasn't about to back down. Not yet. There was something about her that intrigued him, something more than just her fighting skills. "Tell me," Alex said, his voice breaking the silence, "what brings you to this lovely slice of hell?" Her eyes narrowed, and for the briefest moment, Alex thought she might refuse to answer. Then, with a sigh, she spoke. "I am searching for a data core," she said, her tone quieter now. "It was aboard my ship, before it was destroyed. The core contains vital information for my people." Alex's curiosity spiked. "A data core, huh? Sounds important." "It is," she said firmly. "And now that you have helped me, you will assist me in finding it. Bossy, aren't we?" Alex muttered under his breath, but he couldn't help but smile. There was something about her. Maybe it was her strength, or maybe it was just the way her presence commanded attention. Whatever it was, Alex knew he wasn't going to be able to resist helping her. The ruins of Arcanos 5 stretched out before them, a lifeless sea of metal and stone. Alex and Vanya moved through the devastation, her massive hammer still firmly in her grip, her steps heavy and deliberate. The silence between them was thick, broken only by the occasional hiss of steam vents rising from the cracks in the ground. Every now and then, Vanya would glance at Alex with a look that said she wasn't sure if he was a useful ally or a dangerous liability. Alex, for his part, was doing his best to not be intimidated, though he was keenly aware of her physical presence. She was a warrior, proud and fierce, and in this desolate place, she seemed almost invincible. "So, this data core," Alex began, trying to break the tension as they walked. "What's so important about it? You still haven't told me what's on it." Vanya didn't immediately answer, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon as they moved deeper into the wreckage. There was something about her that screamed determination, she wasn't here by accident. Her every movement was calculated, as if she knew this planet's secrets far better than Alex did. "It is classified," she said curtly, her voice carrying the weight of years of discipline and duty. Alex smirked, but there was no humor behind it. "Of course it is." He kicked a piece of alien debris aside, frustration starting to seep into his voice. I've met 100 people like you. Always the same. Secrets, orders, some higher calling. What's the deal, Vanya? You come to a dead world like this to find something that could change the fate of your people, and I'm just supposed to follow along? You don't trust me, and I get it, but you sure as hell need me. Vanya's dark eyes flicked to him, narrowing slightly. I do not trust you, human. You are a means to an end. She didn't elaborate, and Alex didn't press her further. They both knew that they were in this together for now, and that was the only reason they hadn't killed each other yet. The trail led them through the ruins of an alien starship, its twisted remains half buried under rubble. The massive hull was cracked open, exposing darkened interior corridors that seemed to swallow the light. Alex's scanner pulsed faintly, the energy signature from the data core growing stronger with every step. Looks like we're getting closer, Alex said, glancing at the display on his wrist. He raised an eyebrow. That ship's a real beauty. Bet you've never seen anything like this before, huh? Vanya didn't respond. She was too focused on the wreckage. The faint hum of her hammer was the only sound now, a steady thrum of power that seemed to echo through the silent wreckage. It was clear that Vanya's mind was elsewhere, likely on the mission she had embarked upon before fate threw her together with a cocky human salvager. When they reached the entrance of the starship, Alex couldn't help but stop and look up at the immense structure, its gaping wounds a testament to the violence it had suffered. The corridors within were barely visible, shadows creeping into every corner, as though the ship itself were waiting to swallow them whole. Alex sighed and pulled out a small handheld light, switching it on. After you, warrior, he said, giving Vanya a quick, cheeky grin. He wasn't sure if she even noticed. He wasn't sure if she even cared. Vanya didn't hesitate. She stepped into the darkness, her heavy boots echoing in the empty halls. Alex followed close behind, his pulse quickening as they ventured deeper into the ship. Every step felt like it brought them closer to danger, to something unknown. Don't make a sound, Vanya said suddenly, her voice low and urgent. Alex's heart rate picked up. What is it? Vanya raised a hand, signaling for him to stop. They both stood still in the dark corridor, listening. The faint hum of machinery was almost imperceptible, but it was there. A low, almost imperceptible pulse of energy. They've been activated, Vanya murmured, her eyes narrowing. The ship's defense systems. Alex's eyes widened, and he instinctively reached for his sidearm, his fingers tightening around the grip. You mean, we're not alone? Vanya nodded, her gaze scanning the shadows with calculated precision. We're not. Stay close, and keep quiet. The air seemed to thicken around them as they moved forward. The ship felt alive with its own secrets, the walls humming with energy, each step echoing louder than the last. Every corridor seemed to lead deeper into the heart of the wreckage, but Alex couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. It wasn't just the defense systems, there was something else, something much darker at play here. As they made their way through the maze-like interior, Alex couldn't help but be struck by the eerie beauty of the place. Alien glyphs lined the walls, their meanings lost to time, but still etched in intricate patterns. The corridors twisted and turned, creating a labyrinth of steel and shadow. Every now and then, a faint, glowing light would flicker on, illuminating a piece of the forgotten history of this ship. But despite the beauty, there was a creeping sense of dread. The deeper they went, the more Alex's skin prickled with unease. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by a loud screech, the sound of metal scraping against metal. Alex spun around, his hand flying to his sidearm. From the shadows ahead, a faint blue glow flickered to life. Down! Vanya shouted, swinging her hammer with terrifying precision. A bolt of blue energy shot out from the darkness, narrowly missing Alex's head. Vanya's hammer crackled with power, sending out a burst of energy that sliced through the air, frying whatever had shot at them. "Okay, that was impressive," Alex muttered, his heart racing. Vanya didn't respond. Her expression was one of utter focus, every muscle tensed and ready for more. She stepped forward cautiously, her hammer crackling with energy. "Stay close," she ordered, her tone grim. "The defenses are getting stronger." Alex nodded, his face tense as he kept his weapon ready. He could sense the danger in the air, thick and oppressive, like a storm on the horizon. Every corner could hold another threat, another trap. But there was no turning back now. They were too deep into this mission. And with every step, Alex couldn't help but wonder, what was so important about that data core? And what exactly had Vanya been sent here to find? They pressed forward, knowing that the most dangerous part of their journey had just begun. The air inside the alien starship grew heavier, and the shadows seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally as Alex and Vanya ventured deeper into its heart. The soft glow of their lights barely cut through the darkness, illuminating only enough to see the edges of their path. The walls were lined with strange, flickering symbols, remnants of an ancient language that held more mystery than Alex could ever hope to understand. He had seen his fair share of alien technology, but nothing like this: a dead world, a wrecked starship, and a warrior whose secrets ran deeper than he could imagine. They walked in silence for what seemed like hours, though in reality, it was probably only a few minutes. Vanya led the way, her movements fluid and graceful despite the weight of her injuries. Her hammer hummed with quiet power, a constant reminder of the formidable force that lay at her side. Alex, despite himself, couldn't stop watching her. He had known warriors before, but none quite like her, so controlled, so intent on their mission, yet there was a vulnerability in her eyes that made him wonder about the woman behind the warrior. "Stay sharp," Vanya suddenly whispered, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "We're close." Alex's heart skipped a beat. They had been following the pulse of energy from the data core for what felt like forever, but now, it seemed as if they were walking into the belly of the beast. Every step felt deliberate, and the atmosphere inside the wrecked ship was oppressive, like something ancient and angry was watching them from the shadows. A low rumble echoed through the corridor, and Alex felt a shiver run down his spine. He wasn't sure if it was just his imagination or if the ship was reacting to their presence, but something about it felt wrong, like the walls were closing in on them. "Don't stop moving," Vanya ordered, her voice tense but calm. They continued on, deeper into the ship, until they reached a massive, steel door. It was unlike anything Alex had ever seen before, heavily reinforced, covered in strange runes, and pulsing with energy. The door was not just a barrier, it was a challenge. Whoever had built this ship had clearly wanted to keep whatever lay beyond it locked away forever. Alex could feel the weight of the door's presence, as though it were guarding something powerful, something dangerous. "This is it," Vanya said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The core is behind this door." Alex surveyed the door, his mind already working through the mechanics of it. There had to be a way to open it. "Looks like a security lock, but I can handle it," he said confidently, though inwardly, he was bracing himself for whatever came next. He took a deep breath and set to work, pulling out his toolkit and starting to examine the control panel embedded in the wall next to the door. Vanya stood guard, her eyes never leaving the shadows around them. She knew the stakes were high. The core wasn't just a piece of alien tech, it was something more. Alex could feel it too, an unseen pressure that had been building ever since they entered the wreckage. There was something important behind that door, and both of them had their own reasons for wanting to find it. As Alex worked, his fingers flying over the holographic interface, he stole a glance at Vanya. The intensity in her gaze was palpable, she was focused on the task at hand, but her mind seemed far away, lost in thoughts Alex didn't know how to reach. It was clear that she was still haunted by her betrayal, and he knew that, no matter how much he helped her, that wound would never fully heal. "Don't think too much," Alex said, trying to distract her. "You're making me nervous." Vanya shot him a sharp look, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something like curiosity. "You talk too much," she muttered, but this time, there was a hint of something else behind her words, a reluctant acknowledgement of his presence. Alex smirked. "Yeah, it's a gift. I call it, keeping things interesting." The moment was brief, but it was enough to break some of the ice between them. Vanya wasn't used to having anyone around who wasn't either terrified of her or trying to outmaneuver her. But Alex? He was different. And for reasons she couldn't quite place, that bothered her. With a final click, Alex bypassed the security system, and the door groaned as it slowly began to open. The room beyond was bathed in an eerie blue light, the kind of glow that seemed to pulse with life. A large containment field stood in the center of the room, and within it, floating weightlessly, was the data core, an orb of crystallized energy that shimmered with an otherworldly brilliance. The core was a thing of beauty, its surface reflecting the light in strange, mesmerizing patterns. Alex stepped forward, his pulse quickening as he took in the sight. "Well, there it is," he said, his voice a little breathless with excitement. "Looks almost too easy, doesn't it?" Vanya didn't answer. She stepped forward cautiously, her grip tightening on her hammer. "We're not alone," she said, her voice low but steady. Alex frowned, his hand instinctively moving to his sidearm, ready for whatever came next. Before he could ask what she meant, the room suddenly erupted in a cacophony of sounds, clanging metal, a loud whirring noise, and then the sharp, familiar hum of energy weapons charging. From the walls, hidden panels slid open, and drones began to emerge, their weapons glowing ominously. They were fast, their movements swift and precise, and they weren't interested in talking. "Here we go," Alex muttered, drawing his weapon. Vanya wasted no time. With a roar, she swung her hammer, sending a burst of energy crackling toward the nearest drone. It exploded in a shower of sparks and debris. Alex fired his sidearm in quick succession, each shot landing true as the drones closed in. But there were too many of them. They came at them from every direction, their weapons charging, their movements too coordinated. "Watch out!" Alex yelled, as a drone swooped in on his left, its energy blade flashing dangerously close to his face. Vanya moved with deadly grace, her hammer cutting through the air like a thunderstorm. Every swing sent out a shockwave of power that destroyed the drones with a single blow. But even with her immense strength, she was being overwhelmed. They couldn't keep this up forever. "Alex!" Vanya shouted. "We need to get to the core. Now!" Alex nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. He could hear the buzz of the drone's weapons charging up again, their mechanical eyes glowing with cold precision. They had to get the core and get out before they were completely surrounded. Together, they pressed forward, fighting side by side through the chaos. Alex had never been a soldier, but there was something about this moment, something about the way Vanya moved, the way they fought together, that made him feel like they could take on anything. They just had to make it out alive. And with every pulse of the core's energy, Alex felt like they were one step closer to uncovering the truth. What secrets did this alien technology hold? What was it that Vanya's people were willing to risk everything for? The only thing that was certain was that the hardest part of their journey was about to begin. The battle raged on, each moment more intense than the last. The drones, relentless in their pursuit, came at Alex and Vanya from every angle. Their energy weapons hummed with deadly intent, and the air seemed to crackle with tension as the pair fought to keep them at bay. Vanya's massive hammer swung with deadly precision, each strike sending waves of energy that obliterated one drone after another, but for every one they destroyed, two more took its place. The sound of explosions and metal shredding filled the air, drowning out everything else. Alex's sidearm barked in rhythm as he fired shot after shot, the energy blasts lighting up the dark interior of the ship like a strobe light. His mind raced as he moved with precision, ducking and weaving around the debris and the growing pile of destroyed drones. Despite the chaos, something in his chest fluttered, a spark of excitement. This was what he lived for, the fight, the unpredictability, the raw thrill of survival. But even with his confidence, he knew that if they didn't reach the core soon, it would all be for nothing. Get to the core. Vanya shouted again, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. She swung her hammer once more, smashing a drone into the wall with such force that it crumpled instantly. We're running out of time. Alex nodded, his heart racing. They were so close, yet so far. The data core was within reach, but the drones kept swarming, relentless in their attack. He glanced at Vanya, who was holding her ground against the onslaught with a fierce determination. He admired her strength, physically, yes, but more than that, there was a fire in her that he couldn't ignore. A fire that refused to let her back down, no matter the odds. On three, Alex said, crouching low and gesturing toward the center of the room. The core floated in the middle of a glowing containment field, its pulsing energy almost hypnotic. It was their target, and no matter what, they had to get to it. Vanya nodded once, her eyes scanning the room, locking onto the drones still closing in on them. Her expression hardened as she stood tall, ready to move. 1, 2, 3. In a blur of motion, Alex and Vanya dashed toward the containment field, weaving through the chaos of combat. Alex fired a few more shots as cover, keeping the drones at bay long enough for them to make their move. His heart was pounding in his chest, his body moving almost on instinct now, driven by the primal urge to survive and complete the mission. They reached the containment field, and for a moment, everything seemed to slow down. The drones continued their relentless attack behind them, but the shimmering barrier between them and the core was impenetrable, a solid wall of energy that defied all conventional logic. Alex slid to a halt, eyes darting over the glowing surface, searching for a way through. I can't just shoot my way through this, Alex muttered under his breath, his pulse quickening as he glanced over his shoulder. The drones were closing in fast, their weapons charging once more. Vanya gritted her teeth. Then we'll do it the hard way. Her hand shot out, and Alex watched in awe as she pressed her palm to the energy field. A ripple of energy passed from her fingers, and the containment field shuddered in response. Vanya's eyes narrowed with concentration, and a low hum filled the room as the field flickered before stabilizing. She was manipulating the core's energy somehow, bending it to her will, using her own strength to hold it back. Alex's jaw dropped. You're controlling it?" "I'm not controlling it," she replied, sweat beginning to bead on her brow. "I'm just giving it a push. It's weak, but I can get us through." Without wasting another second, Alex moved to her side, pulling out his toolkit once more. "I'll get the locks. You keep it open." Vanya nodded, her teeth gritted in pain, but her resolve never wavered. As Alex worked, the tension in the room grew thicker. The drones were almost upon them, and every second that ticked by felt like an eternity. Alex's hands flew over the panel, connecting wires and tapping into the ship's systems, hacking into the locks that held the containment field in place. The buzzing of the drones grew louder, closer. He could hear their weapons charging, feel the threat closing in. "Hurry up, human," Vanya growled, her voice low and strained. "I can't keep this open for long." "I'm almost there," Alex muttered, sweat running down his forehead as he worked quickly, his mind focused entirely on the task at hand. He wasn't about to let them die in some alien ship over a stupid data core. With a final twist of his wrist, the locks disengaged, and the containment field flickered, then collapsed into a shimmering wave of energy. The data core was now unprotected, floating in midair like a glowing orb of power. "Go!" Vanya shouted, her voice a mix of urgency and triumph. She swung her hammer one last time, crushing the nearest drone into the wall before turning her attention to the core. Alex moved quickly, leaping toward the core, his hands outstretched. As soon as he touched it, a surge of energy pulsed through him, the intensity of it making him stagger back. It wasn't like anything he had ever felt before, it wasn't just power, it was knowledge. Images, data, and symbols flashed in his mind like a flood, too fast to comprehend. His body tingled with the sheer weight of it, but it was the sensation of understanding that overwhelmed him. The data core wasn't just information, it was a bridge to something greater, something that held the key to Vanya's people, to the galaxy itself. What the hell is this? Alex gasped, trying to shake off the dizzying sensation. Vanya was at his side in an instant, her hand on his shoulder, steadying him. Focus, she urged. We don't have much time. What does it say? What is it? Alex's mind was still reeling, trying to make sense of the torrent of data that filled his thoughts. It's a map, he said, blinking rapidly as the pieces of the puzzle slowly started to form in his mind. A map to something important. A weapon, maybe? Or, something even bigger. Vanya's eyes narrowed. What kind of weapon? I'm not sure, Alex admitted, shaking his head. But this data core is connected to more than just a fight. It's connected to the survival of entire civilizations. I think we've just unlocked something that was meant to be forgotten. The room trembled suddenly, and Alex's instinct screamed. Vanya, we need to get out of here. Now. Before either of them could react, the ship's systems began to howl, alarms blaring. The walls shook, and a deep rumbling sound filled the room. The ship wasn't just damaged, it was dying. We're not alone, Vanya said, her voice calm but her eyes flashing with urgency. We need to leave now. As the ship began to collapse around them, Alex and Vanya exchanged a quick, unspoken understanding. They had what they came for, but escaping the wreckage would be the hardest part of all. And they weren't alone anymore. Whatever secrets lay in the data core were about to make them targets in a galaxy that wasn't ready for the truth. The walls of the alien ship groaned and trembled as if it had finally decided to give up its fight for survival. The tremors rattled through Alex's bones, and the air was thick with the scent of burning metal and ozone. His heart raced, the weight of the data core in his hand now feeling like a ticking time bomb. Vanya's hand gripped his arm, her eyes scanning the room with an intensity that could slice through steel. We have minutes, not hours, she said, her voice steady but laced with urgency. Get us out of here, human. Now. Alex nodded, his mind racing. He glanced around, assessing their options. The exit they had entered through was now blocked by debris, twisted metal, and the wreckage of drones they had destroyed earlier. The ship's core was unstable, and every second they spent here risked them both becoming part of the ship's final collapse. He took a deep breath, steeling himself against the panic clawing at his chest. His instincts told him that the core wasn't just a map, it was a key, something that had the potential to shift the balance of power in the galaxy. But they couldn't stick around long enough to figure it out now. I've got an escape route, Alex said, forcing his mind to focus. Follow me. Vanya didn't need to be told twice. She grabbed her hammer tightly and nodded. Lead the way, human. Together, they sprinted through the corridors, Alex's boots pounding against the metal floors, Vanya's heavier steps echoing behind him. Their path was lit only by flickering emergency lights, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and warp around them. Every now and then, the ship shuddered violently, and Alex could hear the distant sounds of explosions reverberating through the hull. It was clear that the ship's systems were failing faster than they had anticipated. Every hallway they ran through seemed to be growing more unstable. Panels flickered above their heads, and the sound of cracking metal made Alex wince. They reached a junction where three paths converged, and Alex stopped, his scanner beeping wildly. He squinted at the display on his wrist, checking the map and then pointing down the left corridor. This way, he said, without hesitation. They ran through the narrow passage, the air growing hotter with every step. Sweat poured down Alex's face, stinging his eyes, but he didn't stop. Behind him, Vanya's steady rhythm never faltered. She was relentless, an unstoppable force, even in the face of certain destruction. But they were far from alone. A loud crack echoed from above, and suddenly, something heavy slammed into the corridor in front of them, blocking their way. Alex stumbled to a halt, his heart sinking as he saw what had caused the obstruction. A massive bulkhead had fallen, trapping them in the corridor. "Damn it!" Alex cursed, pacing back and forth. "This ship's falling apart faster than I thought." He tugged at his jacket, trying to shake off the panic that was creeping up on him. Vanya stepped forward, her eyes already assessing the problem. "You want to fight through that? Or do you want to find another way?" Alex swallowed hard, then glanced back at the map on his wrist. He scanned it for another exit route. "There's a maintenance hatch up ahead," he said, his voice steady despite the pressure mounting in his chest. "It's a tight squeeze, but it should take us to the lower decks. From there, we can find an escape pod." Vanya didn't need further explanation. She turned and began moving, her hammer held tight in one hand, her other brushing past Alex as she led the way. Her presence was a constant reminder of her strength and determination, and, Alex realized, maybe even a little bit of his own growing admiration for her. They reached the hatch a few moments later. It was small, barely big enough for them to crawl through, and it was located on the far side of the corridor. The ship groaned again, the sound of stress and pressure becoming deafening as the structure continued to deteriorate. But neither of them hesitated. Without another word, Alex grabbed the hatch and yanked it open. Inside was pitch-black darkness, but Alex wasn't deterred. He grabbed the flashlight attached to his belt and clicked it on, shining the beam into the dark shaft. It wasn't much to look at, just a narrow crawlspace littered with debris. But it was their best shot. "You first," Alex said, stepping aside to let Vanya go ahead. She glanced at him, an unreadable expression on her face, but then nodded and climbed into the shaft. Her movements were agile despite her injuries, and she quickly disappeared into the darkness. Alex followed right behind her, his heart pounding in his chest as the noise of the ship's crumbling structure echoed louder and louder behind them. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of their breathing and the occasional scraping of their movements in the cramped crawlspace. But then, without warning, the ship gave another violent shake, this time knocking Alex off balance. He barely managed to catch himself before slamming into the walls of the crawlspace. "Watch it." Vanya's voice echoed from the front. "I'm fine," Alex grumbled, but his mind was focused elsewhere. They needed to hurry. The countdown in his mind told him that every second spent crawling through the wreckage brought them one step closer to becoming part of the debris themselves. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the end of the shaft. Vanya pushed open the hatch, and Alex quickly followed her out into another dark corridor. This one seemed relatively untouched, but the occasional spark from broken conduits reminded them that time was still not on their side. "We need to find the escape pods," Alex said, urgency creeping into his voice. "Before this whole place goes up in flames." Vanya nodded, and without a word, they sprinted down the hallway. The ship was alive with danger now, the hum of its collapsing infrastructure filling every corner. Alex's heart raced faster, not just from the physical exertion, but from the gnawing feeling in his gut, the feeling that someone, or something, was still after them. He tried to push the thought from his mind. They were almost there. They just needed to make it to the pod. Then the ship exploded. The floor shook violently, and Alex's world turned upside down as he was thrown against the wall. His breath was knocked out of him, and his vision swam with a sudden rush of disorientation. He could hear Vanya shouting his name, but it sounded far away, distant. The ship's final moments were chaotic, the rumbling and screeching of metal against metal deafening. He pushed himself up, feeling the heat from the explosion singe his skin. His heart pounded as he tried to regain his bearings. He could barely see through the smoke and dust now filling the hallway, but through the haze, he saw Vanya, bloodied, but still standing. "We have to move," she yelled, and Alex didn't need to be told twice. Together, they staggered toward the escape pods, the ship's interior crumbling around them as the last remnants of the vessel systems failed. The clock was ticking. The race for survival had never been more real. The escape pod chamber was close now. Alex could feel the heat on his face intensifying as the ship's systems began to give way completely. The walls around them seemed to tremble with every passing second, as if the ship itself knew its end was near and was trying to take them down with it. "Just a little further," Alex muttered, gritting his teeth as he pushed forward. The air was thick with the scent of burning fuel and electrical fire, and every step felt like it could be their last. Behind him, Vanya's breathing was steady, though Alex knew it wasn't from a lack of effort. She had already taken a few blows from falling debris, her shoulder bloodied and bruised. But she didn't flinch. She never did. The alien warrior was a picture of resolve, even in the face of impending disaster. With one final turn, Alex saw the glint of the escape pods ahead. The narrow corridor stretched out before them, lit only by the flickering emergency lights. His hand shot out, grabbing Vanya's arm and pulling her toward the pods. "There!" Alex shouted, his voice hoarse with urgency. But just as they rounded the final corner, disaster struck. The floor beneath them quaked with an earth-shattering force, and the entire corridor seemed to collapse. Alex was thrown off his feet, his body crashing into the wall as debris rained down from the ceiling. He heard Vanya's grunt of pain, followed by the sound of something heavy hitting the ground. "Vanya!" Alex shouted, pushing himself up with effort. His head swam, but he couldn't afford to lose her. Not now. He stumbled toward where he had last seen her. The dust from the collapse was so thick, he could barely see anything. His heart pounded in his chest, and panic crept in as the seconds ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. Then, just as he reached out into the cloud of smoke and debris, he felt a hand grab his wrist. "I'm here," Vanya's voice came through the haze, steady and strong. "Good God, you're one tough warrior," Alex muttered under his breath, relief flooding through him. He pulled her into his arms, his eyes scanning the wreckage around them. They were close, but the escape pod doors were still a good distance away. The explosion from earlier had damaged the structural integrity of the ship even further, and now the walls were buckling in on themselves. The temperature was rising fast, and Alex could feel the heat seeping through the metal, making it almost unbearable. "We need to move, now," Vanya urged, shaking off the dust that had settled on her. Alex didn't need any more convincing. He helped her to her feet, and together, they ran the last stretch toward the escape pods. They passed through the final corridor, their only goal now being to reach the pods before the ship completely tore itself apart. They reached the airlock, but the door to the escape pods was sealed shut. The controls next to it were flashing red, warning lights signaling that the system was offline. "No way," Alex growled in frustration. He slammed his fist against the control panel, only for the door to stay stubbornly locked. Vanya stepped forward, her gaze steady. "We don't have time to wait." Without another word, she raised her hammer and smashed it against the panel. The impact sent sparks flying, but the door still didn't budge. Alex was about to protest, but then something strange happened. The door slid open with a loud screech, its mechanisms finally giving way under the force of Vanya's strike. "You just broke the whole system, didn't you?" Alex said with a crooked smile, watching the warrior's expression soften just slightly. "I do not follow the rules when my life is on the line," she replied, her voice calm but tinged with a hint of something else, something Alex hadn't heard before. Together, they entered the escape pod chamber, their feet barely touching the ground as they rushed toward one of the nearby pods. Alex's hands were shaking as he input the emergency launch codes, but it was all automatic now. The pod was ready to launch, and all they had to do was get inside. But as they moved toward the pod, a loud crash echoed behind them. Alex spun around, his heart freezing as he saw something he hadn't expected. One of the ship's security forces, an elite Tovian soldier, appeared in the doorway, their arm raised in threat. "You will not leave with the data core," the soldier snarled, his dark eyes locking onto Alex and Vanya. His armor gleamed in the dim light of the pod chamber, and he held a weapon that hummed with dangerous energy. "Great. Just what we needed," Alex muttered, pulling his sidearm from his belt and pointing it at the soldier. Vanya stepped forward, her hammer crackling with power. "He is not here for negotiation," she said coldly. "He's here to stop us." The soldier's lips curled into a snarl. "You do not understand the consequences of your actions. The data core is too important. You cannot be allowed to leave with it." "You're wasting your time," Alex snapped. "We're leaving with it, whether you like it or not." The soldier didn't respond. Instead, he lunged forward, his weapon raised. Alex barely had time to react, but he wasn't the only one who was ready. Vanya was already in motion, swinging her hammer with a powerful, calculated strike that caught the soldier square in the chest. The force of the blow sent him flying back into the wall with a sickening thud. Alex blinked, stunned by the sheer power of the alien warrior's attack. "Well, that was effective," he said, lowering his gun as the soldier crumpled to the ground. Vanya's expression remained unchanged as she looked at the fallen figure. "He will live," she said simply. "But he will not stop us." Without wasting another moment, they entered the pod. The doors slid shut behind them, and Alex felt the rush of relief sweep over him as the countdown to launch began. As the pod's thrusters roared to life, the ship behind them began to shake once again, this time from the force of its imminent destruction. But the escape pod shot away from the wreckage, blasting through the atmosphere and into the unknown. Alex leaned back against the seat, staring out the small viewport at the rapidly receding wreckage of the ship. It was over. For now. "We did it," Alex muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Vanya, however, was looking at him in that same unreadable way, her eyes sharp and calculating. "Yes," she said quietly. "But this is only the beginning." Alex turned to look at her, his curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" Vanya's lips twisted into a faint smile, a flicker of something dangerous and determined in her expression. "The galaxy is vast, human. And what we've just unleashed, it's far more than either of us expected." And with that, Alex realized that his life, and the story of the data core, were about to take a very different turn. The stars streaked by outside the escape pod's viewport, the universe rushing past them as they sped farther from the wreckage of the doomed Tovian vessel. Alex sat in silence, his mind racing. The escape had been a narrow one, barely escaping the clutches of a determined enemy and a ship that was on the brink of disintegration. But even now, as the chaotic glow of the dying ship faded into the vastness of space, a feeling of unease lingered. Vanya sat across from him, her posture rigid, her eyes focused on the stars beyond the glass. She had barely spoken since their escape, and Alex was beginning to understand that she wasn't one to relish the calm after a storm. For her, the fight was never truly over. It was just a momentary pause before the next battle began. "Are you going to tell me what happens next?" Alex asked, breaking the silence. Vanya glanced at him, her dark eyes unreadable. "You want answers?" she asked, her voice low and measured. Alex leaned back in his seat, crossing his arms over his chest. "I want to know what we've unleashed," he replied. "That data core, it's not just some artifact, is it? I'm guessing there's something bigger at play here. Something that involves a lot more than just two survivors and a ruined spaceship." Vanya exhaled sharply, her fingers tapping rhythmically against the side of the pod. "You are correct," she said slowly. The core contains information about a galaxy-spanning war that's been brewing for decades. It's not just about my people. It's about everyone. Alex's brow furrowed. A war? Against who? Vanya hesitated for a moment before answering. Against the Ziphians. The name hit Alex like a ton of bricks. The Ziphians weren't just a name in the galactic records, they were a force of nature. Ruthless, technologically advanced, and merciless in their conquest, the Ziphians had been waging an under-the-radar campaign across the galaxy for years, systematically destabilizing entire systems. What had once been rumors were now confirmed. The Ziphians were no longer hiding in the shadows. They were ready for all-out war. Why haven't we heard about this before? Alex asked, his voice tight with disbelief. Why isn't anyone doing something? Vanya's lips twisted into a bitter smile. The Ziphians have been playing their hand in the dark, using subtlety and deception. Every time a rebellion or resistance movement forms, they crush it before it has a chance to bloom. They've been manipulating factions, dividing them with false promises, and securing their hold on systems in secret. Alex shook his head. So, the core is a record of all this? A map to how to defeat them? Not exactly, Vanya said, her voice hard. The core holds data on Ziphian tactics, the locations of their key strongholds, and the technology they use to suppress their enemies. But more importantly, it holds a secret weapon, something that could change the tide of this war. Alex's eyes widened. What kind of weapon? Vanya met his gaze, her expression suddenly colder. A weapon that could either save us all or doom us to eternal subjugation. Before Alex could press her further, the pod shook violently, jolting them both out of their seats. Alarms blared to life, flashing red across the cockpit. Alex's heart skipped a beat as he scrambled for control, his hands flying over the dashboard. What the hell is going on? He demanded, his eyes scanning the readouts. Someone found us, Vanya said flatly, standing and drawing her hammer, her gaze shifting from the stars outside to the darkened depths of space. They've been tracking us. A cold chill ran down Alex's spine. He knew what that meant. If the Ziphians had tracked them, then they weren't just in danger. They were a priority target. A target that couldn't be allowed to reach the rest of the galaxy. The information they carried had to be contained, destroyed, or wiped out at all costs. The pod shuddered again, this time more violently. Alex saw a flash of light through the viewport as something massive appeared in their path. It was an enormous Ziphian warship, its sleek, angular form cutting through the blackness of space like a knife through fabric. Alex's mind raced. They had no way to outrun it. No way to fight it with the pod's limited weaponry. They were sitting ducks. Brace yourself, Vanya said, her voice hardening. We need to make it to the nearest station. If we don't, they'll destroy us. Alex's mind raced as he made a snap decision. We won't make it to the station. We'll never get there in time. Vanya turned sharply to face him. Then what do you propose, human? He didn't have a plan. Not exactly. But one thing was clear, they weren't going to run. They weren't going to cower in fear. The data core held the fate of the galaxy in its hands, and Alex wasn't going to let it fall into the hands of the Ziphians without a fight. We fight, he said, his voice steady, though his heart was racing. We make them chase us. We draw them away from the core, and we give it a shot. I don't know how, but we fight. We can't just let them take it. Vanya studied him for a long moment, her piercing gaze calculating, as if she were weighing his words, his resolve. Then, finally, she gave a slight nod. Very well, she said. But you will have to trust me. Before Alex could reply, Vanya was already at the controls, her hands moving with practiced speed. The pod lurched again as the Ziphian warship fired a warning shot, no doubt to test their response. The massive ship loomed ever closer, its guns charging for a final strike. But Vanya was already pushing the pod to its limits, veering sharply to the side, engaging evasive maneuvers that Alex had only ever seen in battle simulations. She was a natural, and Alex realized, with a flicker of admiration, that this was her world. This was what she was born to do. The chase began, and Alex's adrenaline surged. The Ziphian ship was relentless, its weapons ripping through the fabric of space with terrifying precision. But the escape pod was faster, darting between asteroids, weaving around debris fields, and using the chaos of the stars to its advantage. Every minute felt like an hour, and every second felt like it could be their last. Alex barely had time to think as the pod bucked beneath him, forcing him to grip the side of his seat. The Ziphian ship wasn't just firing, it was playing with them, baiting them into a corner. But Alex knew what he had to do. "Vanya," he shouted. "We can't keep dodging forever. We need a plan to hit back." Without a word, Vanya adjusted their trajectory, guiding the pod toward an asteroid field dense enough to give them cover. She pulled the lever to deploy the pod's secondary systems. "Stay focused, human. This isn't about running anymore. It's about surviving." And with that, the final, decisive battle for the data core began.